always gives me such an awesome sense of power when I stand and people go silent. It's really awesome. But anyway, I wasn't yet in a position to officially start. And I was going to introduce Temba with a CV and notes and the usual boring stuff. Temba is, of course, well known to some of us, but not all. And then I thought, no, I'm rather going to speak literally as I speak. I'm more looking forward to what I'm going to say than you might be, because I have no idea yet. I thought I'm just going to speak about this man, and I'm going to speak about him personally and emotionally. He is an extraordinary human being, and I'm very proud to know him, and I've got to know him over the years, and I'm going to tell one or two little tales about him, and I'll probably get some of the detail wrong, but I hope Temba won't mind if I maybe just get the concept right. And just to give you some idea of the measure of this man, I was once during the transition years sitting with him and some of his fellow comrades, I think from perhaps his cell in the West Cape, where he was active in the armed struggle. And they were reminiscing about the struggle and the transition and wondering why a particular person was not before the TRC, as I recall it. And as I say, I might have the detail wrong, but the idea, I think, is right, even though I get it wrong. And this was somebody called Spyker van Wyk, and he was a very notorious torturer and interrogator. And Temba was one of the people who was tortured and interrogated during the struggle years by this man, and as far as I know, others. And they were sitting there chatting. Why had nobody heard of him again after the years of transition? And as I recall it, a social worker there, Miriam Gafoor, who I hope won't mind me naming her, said, oh, during the transition years, he'd basically gone nuts and been put away in Sterkfontein, and he'd sort of lost it. And these comrades who'd been amongst his victims were by and large very pleased to hear that this person had been locked away without trial, without due process in what in the old days we used to call a loony bin. And Temba's reaction was quite extraordinary. He said, that's terrible, that's terrible. He said, we really have to go and help him. This is just not right. Where is he? He said to her, can you arrange a visit? And we should go and actually talk to him and tell him, look, the struggle is over, we all did terrible things, let's all shake hands and move on into this new South Africa. And they did try, she did, I think it was she, tried to find him, and he'd been checked in, but he was in fact physically not there, and the conclusion reached is that he might have been disposed of. But Temba's response, and I remember someone else said, but Temba, how can you say that? This was a terrible man who tortured us and killed people, and you want to go and be kind to him. And he said, yes, that is what the ending the struggle is about. It's what we now do. We all go and make up, and we all move on into the future and put that behind us. And I was reminded years later when I saw Mandela being interviewed by Rose, what's his name, the famous interviewer, Charlie Rose, in 1993. And he said to Mandela, he said, Mandela explained to him that the way he kept going during the years in detention and the struggle was he remembered his boxing. He was a lover of boxing. And he said, in boxing, you have to know when and how to punch. But he said, that won't win you the fight. More important than that is to know when to duck and when to back off and when to avoid the punches from the other side. And then Charlie Rose said, well, I presume in the negotiations, you've now got the new constitution. This was 1993, waiting for the election to come. Mandela said, no. He said, no, you don't have any of the rules of boxing when you're negotiating. When you're negotiating, you're all on the same side. You no longer have adversaries. Then you're all on the same side trying to solve a problem out there together. And I thought that reminded me again of Temba, who said, no, that was the struggle. It's gone, it's finished. We now put that behind us and move on. And that's the sort of man he is. Above all else, he's a man of integrity. He's a man who cares in a way that is very deep and very difficult and quite moving, really, to understand, and I'm proud of. The last thing I want to say by way of introducing him, none of which has anything to do why I might be qualified to give this talk, so I'm not supporting that at all, is that I remember saying once, somebody said that the two most valuable qualities a human being can have is dignity and wisdom. They're rare and they are valuable. Very few people have dignity, but some do. We all know people with dignity. But very rare is wisdom. Not many people have wisdom. That's quite a rare quality. You can't really define it, but you know it when you see it, if you're lucky enough ever to see it. And Temba has both, dignity and wisdom. And when I get into trouble, when I do something really wrong, and I've really messed up, and I don't know how to get myself out of the hole, or I don't know what the right thing to do is in a given situation, the one I ask is Temba, and he will give you wisdom. And I could cite many examples, which I won't, but he is one of those very, very, very rare people, and there are not many I've been lucky enough to know in my life who you could legitimately call wise. Temba is one of those few people. So he's a special person. It's my great honor to have him as a colleague and friend and to know him. And I've long since forgiven him for the fact that he came to the Free Market Foundation as a Marxist-Leninist revolutionary to come and find out what these horrible, evil capitalists were doing and to disrupt us and destroy us. And then he decided, actually, we're not such bad people, and that's why we have him here today with us. And this is Temba. Please welcome him.
Thanks, Leon, for those kind words. And it does pose a challenge for me, what you have said, in that it's going to make it immensely difficult for me to rise to the occasion. But I will do my best. A week ago, I was engaged in a debate. It was supposed to be a panel discussion. It had degenerated into a debate between a socialist professor and myself, where the person was talking about there's no such thing as a free market and so on. And he was fuming. He was fuming. And I said afterwards, you know, whenever I'm engaged in a debate with people who come from the socialist, statist, big government perspective, I always incur their wrath. I always do. And so if there might be one or two people here who come from that statist, big government orientation, and I don't think they will like me that much at the end of my talk. Yeah. So anyway, the other thing that I must say is that I always state up front also that I am neither politically correct nor politically incorrect, but that I am politically incorrigible. And so for me, there are no holy cows and nothing is sacrosanct. I feel that I'm one of the freest people in the country who can speak very, very openly. And in the process, of course, as I've mentioned, I do alienate some people, but these will be people who believe in big government, that government should do everything, who want people to be dependent on government. So that's me. The title was inflicted on me by Eustace. My colleague Eustace, I had some other idea in terms of what I should be addressing you on, but when he persuaded me, then I got to understand what he had in mind and so on. So I embraced the task. Now, there is an article which has the same topic that's been written. It's on our website. And so what I decided to do, assuming that some of you may have read that article, is that let me generate something else that would be more or less consistent and compatible with what I had written. And so when you visit that article, and after this, you will find that there are some things that I will have said here that are not incorporated in that article. Time for South Africans to live and let live. What does it mean? It speaks for itself. It's so axiomatic. What it just simply means is that allow me and I'll allow you to pursue your socio-economic aspirations, so long as you do not violate my rights and I do not violate yours. That's what it means. Which means in the economic arena, anyone is free to enter into whatever economic transactions, so long in the process there is no force or fraud entailed. And that in a nutshell encapsulates what a free market is. It's about live and let live. Now I'm going to cite a quotation that I came across from one of the classical liberals, John Stuart Mill. And this again encapsulates the essence of the words live and let live. This is what he says. Now, he was the English philosopher who was born in 1806 and died in 1873. That was quite some time ago. He had said these words: "The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. Over himself, over his body and mind, the individual is sovereign. In the part which merely concerns himself, his independence is of right absolute." Wonderful, wonderful words that were uttered such a long time ago. And for me, which is why when people ask me, what in 2 words can you sum up as your mission in the context of a free market foundation or in your personal context, I say, my mission is about individual sovereignty. That's what I say. It sums it all up. What do you mean? Sometimes I'm engaged by socialists and so on, and then I dwell on that and I elaborate and so on. And I say to them, look, can you relate to this? Oh, yes, I can understand, but you capitalist kind of thing and so on. They always come in with that, with such interventions and so on. Now, I want to share with you also an instance that occurred in 1680 that underscores this point about people saying, leave us alone so that we can live and let live. The government do not interfere with us. Leave us alone. In 1680, the Minister of Finances during King Louis XIV's reign in France, his name was Jean-Baptiste Colbert. He was a mercantilist. He got a group of merchants together that he had invited to a meeting with him and asked them, what can the state do for you as merchants so that there can be greater productivity of the goods and services, and especially foods that you produce? Their response was, laissez-nous faire, leave us be, leave us alone. That's what they said. Now, I wish politicians, governments could understand that. But when you leave people alone and you allow them that policy, socio-economic environment where they can interact with one another without harming one another or violating one another's rights, you will have a situation that's going to be conducive to the sort of economic situation, socio-economic situation, and peace, and stability, and prosperity that we all aspire to. This is very, very, very important. Now, Walter Williams, the US economist, talks about what he calls the rules of the game. The rules of the game that he talks about, he simply means the policies that the government adopts. Because at the end of the day, when people are not allowed to live and let live, you will find that there is a culprit that is responsible for the state of affairs. And that culprit is the government. It is the government dictating to people as to how they should lead their lives and how they should relate to one another. It is the government at the end of the day. If you look at the mess that we're in today, if you look at the fact that we have this high unemployment rate in this country, high crime levels and everything, it is all a consequence of government policy. So Walter Williams talks about the rules of the game. There is a rule of the game that I am passionate against, and that is affirmative action. In the context of South Africa, that is broad-based black economic empowerment, euphemistically called. For me, it is such a burning personal mission to do away, to have this policy, this pernicious policy repealed. We do not need this. And for me, the fact that we have this policy in place means that we are negating what Mandela went to prison for, what he believed in. And that in the process, the rainbow is receding. It's going far because this policy especially alienates a sector of the population, namely white. It also contributes to racial tensions between the coloreds and the Indians and the blacks. It does that. This is something that was predictable, something that I foresaw, and all I had to do was to look at empirical evidence where affirmative action-oriented policies have been implemented. But let's come back to the rules of the game story. Now, Walter Williams says, the rules of the game determine the winners or losers of the game. That's what he says. The rules of the game decide whether people are going to live together harmoniously or not, and these rules of the game are prescribed by the government. It's very important for us to be always conscious of that. Now, let me adapt an analogy that Walter Williams uses. I can tell you that give me any time the Springbok team, and I can have a team that comprises only women, and they would win against the Springboks playing a game of rugby. Provided you just allow me the latitude to rig the game in the favor of women. Just one rule. So I would say, well, this match, rugby match, is going to be played on high-heeled shoes. Now we know who would win. So just this analogy illustrates that at the end of the day, it is the rules of the game that decide whether we are going to live harmoniously in this country. And the thing is, who is responsible for the rules of the game? I want to reiterate this. It is the government and nobody else. Now, some people have this idea, and politicians like this, to indulge in this vice, and that is whenever there is a racial or racist incident or act perpetrated by one person, they generalize. And they say, well, you see, whites are like this. They've never changed. They will never change. That's the politicians. Or blacks are baboons. This is one person who says this. One person who says this. And politicians run with this. Say, you see, we told you. We told you. So now it is the politicians. But sometimes because these rare incidents occur, the politicians always jump on the bandwagon. And sometimes we forget that it is the politicians themselves who are primarily, actually responsible for this state of affairs. It is them, and they can put it right. It's very easy. Now, I've talked about affirmative action. Now, what I did over the years was to study countries where affirmative action has been implemented, because this one has always preoccupied me because of the fact that it contributes to all these racial conflicts and tensions and so on. I look at the fact that confronts the Americans. This is the fact that if you look at the income levels of the various American ethnics, the Japanese, Asiatic ethnics, and Hispanics, and Latinos generally, you will find that the black Americans occupy the lowest rung on the socio-economic ladder. This is still the situation. And you ask yourself, why is this so? Despite the fact that affirmative action has been implemented in the country for over 50 years. 50 years. Why is this so? Why is it that the Asiatics occupy the highest rank in terms of incomes, and that within that group, it is especially the Japanese Americans who are the highest income earners of all ethnics that comprise the U.S. collage, population collage? What happened with affirmative action? What happened? Everything points to the fact that there is something fundamentally amiss, something fundamentally wrong with the very concept of affirmative action. Now, let me cite some reports here so that it can be very clear to you how counterproductive this policy of affirmative action has been in the US. There is a report that's titled The Money Income in the United States 2000 report by the US Census Bureau. It details the following information. The median income data in 1999 in $2,000. Asian and Pacific Islander, $52,925. White, $43,932. Hispanic origin, $31,767. Black, $28,848. Despite 50 years of affirmative action being implemented in order to benefit the blacks in that country, something is seriously amiss. Something is seriously amiss. Then, if we extend the period for affirmative action for the results to possibly potential positive results to come to the fore, let me take you back to the report, which is titled the U.S. Census Bureau Report. It provides March 2014, it provides data for mean household income by ethnicity as follows. Asia alone, $90,752. White alone, $79,000. Okay, Asia alone, $90,752. White alone, $79,340. Hispanic or Latino, $54,644. Black, $49,629. $49,629. Something is seriously amiss here. Right, let me bring you to this other report here. 2015. This is just yesterday, next door. The same trend is reflected. The same trend can be perceived. And here the report is titled Income and Poverty in the United States, 2015. The picture is as follows. This is about now U.S. household income earnings per ethnic group, estimated. Asian, $74,382. White household, not Hispanic, $60,325. Hispanic any race, $42,540. Blacks, $35,439. The policymakers in the US just don't get it. They just don't get it. These are the figures that come from government. And, you know, if you go to Malaysia, where also affirmative action policies were implemented in order to benefit the so-called Bumi Puteras, which means the indigenous Malays, and discriminated against, where the Chinese, it was also the Indians, those minorities in that country. Now, I'm going to quote what is from The Economist. This is 2017, 18th of May. The project, mobile phone stands. The discrimination is even that low that to operate, to have a stand, to sell or service mobile phones, this is for the monopoly of the Malays, the Bumi Puteras, the indigenous Malays in that country. But let me read this extract from The Economist. The project is just one recent outcome of racially discriminatory policies which have shaped Malaysian society for more than 50 years. Schemes favoring Malaysians were once deemed essential to improve the lot of Malaysia's least wealthy racial group. These days, they are widely thought to help mostly the well-off within that group while failing the poor and aggravating racial tensions. Now, in this country, it was predictable that the same thing would happen. And so what is unfolded and is still unfolding is that the people who benefit are those who are politically connected, those black elites who are politically connected. And so where in the world do you find a phenomenon such as somebody coming out of parliament or being associated with parliament with no business background, with no business acumen, they become millionaires? The second following year, 2 years, 3 years, multimillionaires. And then in no time, billionaires. Where do you find this phenomenon? Where? You don't find it anywhere else. And so affirmative action has got nothing to do with the economically, so-called economically disadvantaged. It's got nothing to do with the poor people, nothing whatsoever. And so what I had predicted would happen, this was even before 1994, when even just the basic term affirmative action was being bandied about, I had predicted that these would be the people who would benefit and nobody else. And nobody else. And so the concern is here that so long as we have racially defining policies in this country, people are going to be racially profiled. And that means that we are going to have racially preferential policies in this country, which means they are discriminatory. I was invited to address, sorry, I have to dwell on just this one aspect of several that emanate from government that tend to cause all racial tensions and do not allow people to live and let live. I was invited by the IFP caucus to articulate a free market perspective on the Employment Equity Act when it was a bill that was quite a couple of years ago. And so almost the full caucus was there. And I said to them, look, I'll tell you what, I'm going to articulate not only just a free market perspective on this, but also a Temba A Nolutshungu personal perspective on this, because for me, it is something that I am seizing, from a personal sort of perspective. We should not be having such bills, under discussion at all. So I started off by saying, well, what is being proposed is tantamount to racial discrimination. No, a hand shot up. No, it's racially preferential policy. I said, racially preferential means that you're discriminating against the others, that you are not identifying as the beneficiaries of the policy that you're pursuing. And I said, what is sick about this? What sickens me in terms of the practical implementation, and especially for the people who have to conform with this policy, is that where you have to generate an equity plan that has to reflect the demographics of the country, you start looking at your workforce through racial binoculars. Now, oh, this one is black, this one is white, this one is colored, and all of that stuff. That is sick. That is sick. Post-1994. For me, I thought to myself, gosh, what's going on here? And so I was hard-hitting in terms of my presentation at the time. And there was Dr. Mario Ambrosini, a friend, and who tackled me. And I said, look, prove to me that this is not racially discriminatory. He couldn't. So I said, well, that's me. But what can we do about this? I said, no, there are lots of things that could be done. You know, instead of pursuing this kind of policy that is so divisive and so clearly pernicious. And I said, you watch what's going to happen in this country. Watch what's going to happen. First of all, whites are not going to be able to say much, right, in terms of, first of all, engaging in this legislation, or in terms of other policies that would be predicated on improving the lot of black people. They would just keep quiet, because the thing is, they will be told you're saying that because you're a white person. You're pining for the good old days of apartheid and so on and all that nonsense. Now imagine for one moment we did not have this BBBEE nonsense. I call it nonsense. Imagine for one moment we didn't have that. It would be a lovely country. Imagine if this was a situation where the social political environment was one that allowed for us to live and let live. It would be fantastic. It really would be. Now, one last point I want to make about affirmative action in the USA. I've mentioned that the Japanese American ethnics, who sit right at the top of the socio-economic ladder, they occupy the top rank. To what do you ascribe that? No. Was there affirmative action on their behalf? No affirmative action at all. But it turns out that in 1940, Japanese ethnics, those in professional occupations, their proportion was less than half of that of white people. This was 1940. And then, with the outbreak of the Second World War, and when the attack on Pearl Harbor was committed by the Japanese Imperial Army in 1941, President Roosevelt implemented an executive order in terms of which there were areas that had been designated for military purposes, and any people could be moved to those areas. Though he did not explicitly mention the Japanese ethnics, but it was them who bore the brunt of that executive order. And so, according to Professor Thomas Sowell, more than 100,000 Japanese women, children, and men were moved to Arkansas, a place, to quote Thomas Sowell, where nobody had lived before and nobody has lived since. And there, moving to that area, they had to get rid of all the properties that they had. And so within a matter of weeks, they had to liquidate businesses that had been built over lifetimes. They had to sell properties. They had to sell their furniture. And they were accommodated in hostels, where there were communal ablution facilities. And at the end of the war, and the reason was that the Japanese ethnic loyalties were suspect because of the Pearl Harbor attack. And so at the end of the war in 1945, was there compensation or restitution for the Japanese Americans? None. There was nothing. And they started afresh. And in 1950, they started to narrow the income gap between them as the Japanese ethnics in America and the whites. and the whites in America. No, this is not ascribed to state intervention on behalf of the Japanese and so on. None whatsoever. None whatsoever. And then in 1959, the Japanese Americans, they earned 99% of the incomes of the whites. Of the whites. And then in 1969, I think it was 1969, yes it was, the average personal income of Japanese was 11% above the national average. In that same year, the average family household income of the Japanese Americans was 32% above the national average. These were the Japanese. No state intervention on their behalf. But let's look at blacks here. Think at the blacks what their situation was. Now, regarding the economic progress of black people in the US, it may be surprising to see that between 1961 and 1971, black family incomes rose by 55%, while that of white families rose by a mere 31%. Between 1960 and 1972, the number of blacks in professional occupations doubled, while that of whites in the same category increased by 1/5. This was the glorious era for black people. This was in the absence of affirmative action. And so all those income disparities that placed black people at the lowest rank came after and despite 50 years of affirmative action. So the lesson to be gleaned from this is just simply that, look, here's empirical evidence. We do not need this policy. And as related to the topic, this policy is divisive. And it accounts a great deal for the fact that there's capital flight, especially amongst the white people, and especially the youngsters. If you're a youngster, you're a white person, you're in this country, and you're looking at affirmative action policies and so on, I can imagine it would be alienating. That it would get you to think that, you do not see your future in this country. I empathize with young people especially, young white people especially. Now, so what can be done? What can be done? What can the government do? What should be done in a way that whatever is implemented, say by the government, does not violate that very important, basic, fundamental principle of freedom, of liberty, of people wanting their own space in order to interact with others? What should the government do? There are a couple of things that the government can do. Couple of things that the government can do. And so what I'm going to do now is take you through the slides, some of the slides that I've got here. And I'll explain to you what needs to be done. Václav Klaus, ex-president of the Czech Republic, when I was in that country in 1991, and I saw for myself firsthand the ravages of the communist socialist system. There was just no economy in that country. According to the taxi driver who fetched me from the airport to take me to Wenceslas Square, where the hotel I was going to live in was located, and he said, spoke a smattering of English, tell me about the economy. He said, no economy here. And he said, well, people pretend to work and the government pretends to pay them. That's what he said. Now, the airport itself, when I landed there, this is in the heart of Europe, in Czechoslovakia then, before it broke up into the two republics. The airport was a kind of horse stable, just to put it dramatically. I couldn't comprehend that there could be a place like this and being known, identified as the airport in the heart of Europe. And when I went to the hotel, the city of Prague was a ruined city, literally ruined. Now, 8 years later, with a group of members of parliament, we went on a fact-finding study tour that took us to England, to London, and then to Prague. When I got to Prague and the plane was landing at the airport, I just could not comprehend the change, the transformation that had taken place everywhere. The airport was sophisticated just like any other airport, and being driven to the same hotel that I had stayed in. The same hotel that I stayed in before, 8 years previously. It was such a magnificent hotel, and all around in Wenceslas Square, the city had, it seemed it had awoken up from this deep socialist slumber. Everywhere there were signs, there was evidence of people working hard and a lot having been achieved, and I just couldn't comprehend that within 8 years this had been achieved. And the reason for that, the story behind that, is the privatization voucher system that was implemented by the government at the time, at the helm of which was Václav Klaus and Václav Havel, the novelist. So now we have been propounding this as a solution to not only promote, to enhance, to contribute towards a flourishing economy, a flourishing society, but to also ensure that people would mostly be involved in the process of wealth creation. These vouchers were given to all the citizens of the country. And the government had embarked on an energetic, comprehensive, program to educate the people, because imagine a whole population that knew nothing about the economy, because the economy had been owned by the nomenclatura, the Communist Party. It had been owned by the Communist Party. And this, what I'm going to share with you now, this voucher, explains it all. It was given to everybody, and what we advocate as the Free Market Foundation is that the government should give shares to the people, to poor people, on a means-tested, non-racial basis. We move away from race. There are poor whites, there are poor Indians, there are poor colors, there are poor pinks, there are poor blacks, and so on. Just think about the poor people and say they are the ones who should be getting these privatization vouchers. In SAA, in ESCOM, all these state-owned enterprises. Remember, all the state-owned enterprises which were part of the government, the economy, entire economy that was owned by the socialist administrations in Prague, nobody had anything in terms of an economic activity. Now, let me show you. This is what I'm talking about. I refreshed my memory by, again, discussing with the Liberalny Institute, which is the equivalent of the Free Market Foundation in that country. And we went over these vouchers and so on, just refresh my memory and so on. Unfortunately, I don't have an English version. But this is what you got. You got a booklet, right? This is the coupon privatization voucher. You got a booklet that was given to you, right, and given to everybody. And in this booklet, this coupon book, you entered your details, who you are, where you stay, and so on. And also, you had a decision to make, and that is in which state-owned enterprise you wanted shares in. Entirely up to you, right? So you could decide, no, I want shares in this state-owned, previously state-owned enterprise. I want in that one as well. This other one, people would make all sorts of choices. Yeah, against the information that you had to fill in. And here, this came from TV, and they would go every day. It would be like there would not be any place that you went to there wasn't any information that related to these privatization vouchers, coupons. There's somebody paging through and having to make a decision as to which ones they wanted shares in. Now, this is feasible. It was implemented in the Czech Republic, and it can be implemented in this country. And the dividends would be amazing. Because the thing is, when people have shares in a company, that means you own part of the company. So you are interested in the dividends that would be accruing from that investment. So you keep that company on a short leash. You want to know every day what is happening with the dividends and so on. That is why the private sector delivers, and that is why the public sector does not deliver. And as Leon points out, when things are in the hands of a state, they are in a hell of a state. That is what explains it. Now, there is another proposal from the Free Market Foundation. This is about property titling. We call it Kayalam. You've heard that name before. But this is a very, very, very important project that we have embarked upon. And the important thing to bear in mind about this is that where Hernando de Soto, in his book, The Mystery of Capital, talks about dead capital, he means property that is not titled in terms of freehold title. So once it's legalized and you have a freehold title to it, then it just, at the stroke of a pen, becomes active capital. It becomes an economic asset. It becomes part of the economy, part of the economy. And there's something else that's important about that, and that just allowing people to own their properties legally in terms of a title deed that they have in their hands, that becomes a catalyst for self-economic empowerment. Not empowerment, the way the government, you're sitting back there and so on, we're going to empower blacks, say, here's something to you, like the black industrialists, 20 black industrialists that the government is contemplating, empowering and so on. It's not that at all. What happens is you own property. When you own the property, one of the things that you do, because of that ownership sort of logic, you want to see that property's value appreciating. That's what you want to see. And so in the process, what you do is that you hire bricklayers, you hire plasterers, you hire plumbers, you hire carpenters, you hire all sorts of people, and those people have unskilled labor that they bring along with them. And in the process, there's a transfer of skills because the guys learns from the artisans now how to do A, B, C, and so on. And this all starts with only just one measure, and that is allowing people to own title deeds. Now, there's something like 5 million people who are in a position for their properties to be titled. 5 million. Imagine 5 million people owning their properties. And what you've seen in townships like villages like Tumahole, like in Langa, like in Manenberg, where people eventually have had title deeds, you've seen the improvements. You've seen the improvements. Now imagine 5 million people benefiting from just this measure of a stroke of a pen on the part of the government and allowing people to expediting a process in terms of which people end up with title deeds. It would be so empowering. Then I hear some socialist Neanderthals like Ben Cousins who says, no, this does not even begin to address the land reform sort of challenges of this country and so on. Talking nonsense. And I would like him to meet with these women, the angry gogos. This was in the Cape Times, 2010. Read what this placard says. We demand our title deed from 1982 to 2010. See that? To 2010 World Cup. We are sick and tired to stay in the darkness. I'd like some of these academics to meet with these women. I think they'd get a good clap from them. You know, they're very angry. This was before. This is what we are conceptualizing the Kailam project. And there were these women. So there is a great demand for properties to be fully titled. And if that were to be expedited by the government at the stroke of a pen, it would be wonderful for the country. Now, this was in KZN, in the heartland of KZN, in the villages. This was within the Nkandla area. Leon took this photograph. We were there that year. These are women. These are women from the various villages. And we are talking, some people say, oh, you Free Market Foundation, you talk at that sophisticated level, you talk at that level and so on. But what about the people out there and so on? We engage with everybody from all sorts of background. And for us, the proposals that we are putting forward are designed to benefit primarily these people, the ordinary people, the people who you could say live in an economically depressed context, so to speak, say in some of the townships. And this is why I put this on here, because I wanted you to comprehend and understand that at the end of the day, the free market is about small people. It's about people who are outside who want to get in. It's about allowing people to live and let live. That's what the essence of free market is about. Now, I came across this from somebody who had got it from somewhere. This guy is asking, what's the difference between pollution and solution? Yeah, the other one responds, if a politician drowns in a river, it's pollution. And if all of them drown, then it's a solution. This is what this other guy says. Now, there is another measure that we propose as a Free Market Foundation that will promote good race relations and certainly ensure that people live and let live. And this one is about removing all red tape that imposes unnecessary legislative encumbrances to the spirit of enterprise. Remove them. At the end of the day, if we want jobs to be generated, if we want wealth to be created, allow the private sector space. And you, the government, in terms of your duty in this regard, your duty is to ensure that the policies that you enact will be conducive to the proliferation of business, and make sure and make it easy for businesses to come in. Especially the small and medium business sector, the small business sector, and the informal sector. And right now, the government is causing all sorts of problems, putting all sorts of encumbrances right in front of the small business operators, especially. And it's alienating them. It's causing them pain. You know, and so if you're going to have people who, thanks to government policy, will not be able to operate productively, businesses, and get the sort of returns that they aspire to, then those people are going to be, some of them are going to be problematic in that they have to be taken care of by the taxpayers at the end of the day. And some of them, that might not be sufficient in terms of that, and being a part of those people who receive social grants and so on. And some of them might resort to all sorts of things, and some of them might actually start to listen to all this rhetoric that emanates from the political arena, that you are in this situation because of white people. Because that's what politicians are saying. That's what they're saying. You are victims of colonialism, you are victims of apartheid, you are victims of whites. There's all this indulgence in scapegoating. But at the end of the day, when they talk about, politicians talk about colonialism, when they talk about imperialism, when they talk about apartheid, they're talking about whites. They're talking, those terms are synonymous with white people, the way they use them. And so what adds fuel to this sentiment is the fact that we have this affirmative action, triple BEE policy in place. So long as we have this policy, we are not going to get anywhere, and the rainbow will recede even further and maybe even at a faster pace. Now, another measure is that with people who've been unemployed in the country for something like 6 months, you should allow them exemption certificates. What that means is that you allow the employee to enter into a voluntary contract with the prospective employer, in terms of which the desperate, very desperate work seeker says, look, I don't care that much about being covered by existing labor relations acts, such policies. I'm desperate to put bread on the table. I want work. When? Yesterday. Right? So if you implement such a measure, you're going to see that there will be eagerness, especially on the part of the small business sector, to employ people, employ more people. You will see that happening. But if this doesn't happen, I'm afraid the situation is going to get worse from what it is right now. Now, this is another favorite of mine. Every year in this country, every time, there are new laws being passed. Yeah, Leon calls this legislative diarrhea. I call it legislative incontinence. New laws, new laws, new laws, new laws, new laws, new laws, new. And these laws restrict the space in which individuals can interact with one another. They do. Now, if you are an employer, for example, if you look at the labor policies in this country, now you do not have that personal relationship with your employees because there is big government right behind your employees. There is organized labor behind your employees. And so, for example, you don't have that intimacy at that level. Employer, employees, you don't have that. Right? And if you employ me as a black person and you're running this business, being a white owner, and first of all, I can tell you, despite the fact that I might turn out to be a congenital jackass, that you will not be able to get rid of me. You will not be able to get rid of me. All I'd have to do is just to scream discrimination, victimization, end of the story, this white employer kind of thing and so on. And at the end of the day, it has to do with the fact that we've adopted these racially discriminatory preferential policies in this country that tend to accentuate those superficial racial differences amongst ourselves. For me, that is the major culprit that has to be done away with. And I can't understand, I have to end off now, I think my time is running. I can't understand why politicians cannot look at empirical evidence as a basis for informing their policies. It's all there. It is all there. I've mentioned the two countries, Malaysia, I've mentioned America and so on. With everything that we propose as the Free Market Foundation, it always is predicated on empirical evidence, always compatible with empirical evidence, or is substantiated by empirical evidence. Why can't the politicians do that? No, they have their own agenda, and the state has been captured Now we're talking about Guptas having captured the state. No, it was captured long before then by the proponents, advocates of affirmative action policy. They hijacked that agenda. Now they control it. They control it. And you can be sure that they are going to be as vociferous as they have always been, because they're looking after their own interests and not looking at the big picture in this country. Oh, judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason, as Mark Antony said in Julius Caesar. I feel that way. On that note, thank you.
Will you take questions?
Yeah.
We are over time, so a few questions. Anyone?
Could you explain the reason for the spectacular success of the Japanese American, the probably spectacular lack of success of the black American, and the mediocre success of white or European Americans?
Yeah, very briefly. You know, if you allow people their space to pursue their aspirations, whatever they might be, right, and you do not interfere with that, which means interfering with their liberty, they get somewhere, because liberty is the fountain of human progress. When you are looking after your own interests and you, knowing which are based on your priorities, on your choices, based on your preferences, nothing will stop you. You're going to get somewhere. So with the Japanese, all that happened was the government just did not interfere with their aspirations, with their endeavors to improve their socio-economic circumstances. At the end of the Second World War, they were just left open like that. And for me, freedom is the fountain of human progress. That's what it is, and this is what vindicates it. Now, Frederick Douglass, a former slave in the U.S. and who became a statesman, an orator and a statesman, a former slave, he said this, you know, and this underscores the point that I've just explained. He said this, born in 1818 and died in 1895, he said this: everybody has asked the question, and they ask it early of abolitionists, what shall we do with the Negro? I have had but one answer from the beginning: do nothing with us. Your doing with us has already played the mischief with us. Yeah. Now, this is Frederick Douglass, a former slave, saying this. He was not saying, oh, you have to pay us back for all that suffering and so on. And he got someone to be a statesman. He became a statesman. You know, so this is about freedom. So he's a freed slave. And he pursued his ambitions and aspirations thanks to freedom that he was allowed. Now, if you look, now Martin Luther King was one other person who carried on with that sentiment. But that sentiment now seems to have fallen on deaf ears because of the likes of Jesse Jackson, for example, who reminds, you know, the US government and the whites that they owe the current black generation, they owe them for all that suffering years ago. I would have loved to have met this man, Frederick Douglass, but I take solace from the fact that my late uncle, Professor Sam Nolutshungu, who was on stage very briefly the Vice Chancellor at Wits University, he was the director of that institute named after Frederick Douglass. So that's the answer to what I'm saying. Freedom. I'm going to explain something else just to, again, emphasize this point. There was a time in South Africa when we really had a true free market. Don't believe this? If you went to the townships during the time when the townships, with the aftermath of the no-go areas, right, when the townships were declared that, there was this time of negotiations, now Mandela coming out and so on. There was almost no government in control. Almost no government in control. There were no no police vans in the townships. There was no law enforcement of existing regulations or policies whatsoever. Nothing. I remember Leon saying at the time, this is one moment, it will never come again. Cherish it while it lasts. He had said words to that effect. But at that time, in all the townships, during that time, you did not see long queues of people who were starving and looking for food and so on, because the informal business was thriving, the businesses were booming, the businesses were thriving in those townships without government interference whatsoever. That was a blissful moment in this country when those people, left to their own devices, the government not being involved in their economic activities, government being absent and not actually being visible, they rose to heights that I, even myself, immersed in the townships, could not comprehend. It's about freedom. So.
If I could add something to your response to that question of freedom. If we can take an example here, those Japanese people, because they were concentrated in an area and had all their assets taken away virtually or had to get rid of them, post that situation, they had to rely on each other as a community. And that's why they boomed. I can give you an example in this country of the Eritreans, which have come down from a war zone up there. They work together in our townships and they flourish. Why? Because they work together. They help each other, they bring their friends in and they set them up in business, they help them to get stock and help them to get money, and they're phenomenal traders. And the Japanese have similar talents.
So thank you. Even in that case, there the important thing is freedom, or relative freedom in their case. Because economic refugees coming into this country, they look for the slightest economic opportunity and they run with it. And the locals look up to organized labor, they look up to the government because there is affirmative action. People coming from outside are not interested in whatever laws might be prevailing in the country. All they seek is just that window of opportunity, and they go for it. They go for it, and that is why after some and when you hire them, they don't ask about the. By the way, isn't there a minimum wage that you are supposed to be paying? They don't ask anything. They just want a job. They get the job. Even that relative freedom, which now might not be that much in terms of the big picture of economic freedom, it means a lot to them. Now open that up, and then you're going to see miracles, economic miracles.
I think we need to wrap up. Temba will still be around. There's cheese and wine and socializing, and I'm going to abuse the privilege of being the MC of this event, and just add this point, that it seems to me that it would be a very strange world, in response to your question, if different cultures had the same outcomes. So you expect Hindus and Muslims to perform differently in India. You expect Irish Catholics and Jews to perform differently in Ireland. And so regardless of race, different cultures have different outcomes. And I think it would be very odd indeed were that not the case. And I think one of the problems that we face by social engineers is that they want everybody, old and young, urban and rural, Catholic and Jew, whatever, and of course white and black, or men and women, to have the same result, despite the fact that they start differently, with different values, different abilities, different ages, different conditions. So I would say if they were the same, then the question would have to be, how's that possible? Why would that be? How could it possibly be that the Japanese and the Jews and the Catholics and the Irish and the Europeans and the blacks and the indigenous Indians and so on have the same outcomes? That to me would be very difficult to explain and very strange indeed. But that is what social engineers want to achieve. I want to say thanks to Temba. I think that might have been somewhat of a roller coaster ride for you as it was to me. I had no idea that what he was going to do was attack affirmative action. but he did, and he did so in a fairly passionate and emotive way, and as I think I predicted for you, he is a person who has values and principles that he cherishes and will defend and fight for. And so with that, Temba, thank you. And I would say that the sad thing about it is that probably many of you were sitting there thinking, and probably all of us would sit around and think, isn't it strange that a black person who was a Marxist-Leninist revolutionary in the struggle, coordinator of the armed struggle or something like that in the West Cape, I don't know what his official position was, fighting against apartheid, comes out now in a position you would not expect a black man to take. And that reminds me of when Walter Williams was explaining why he, a black American from the slums of North Philadelphia, brought up by a single mother in atrocious ghetto conditions, now one of the world's most recognized and prestigious economists, was on Oprah Winfrey, and he was also attacking affirmative action. And she said, I'm surprised that a black man has views like yours. And Walter Williams said, I can promise you two things. One is that I'm not a professional black man, and two is that I never use my skin when I think. And so that is a truly liberated person, and Temba is one of the few people who has liberated himself from race completely. As a colleague and friend, I can tell you, is one of the people you can be very relaxed about. You never have to be nervous or worried that you might say the wrong thing. You can discuss all the taboos, you can discuss prejudices, you can, even I've had discussions with him about, are white-colored, blue, Asian, whatever, Indian, African skins more attractive. You can discuss the aesthetics of the skin color with Temba, and it's just simply an interesting discussion. It's not doesn't get tied up with emotion, and that's him. He wants to look at the facts, and he's a liberated human being in every sense of the word, whether it's gender or race or religion or culture or anything else. And I think you've seen that for yourself. So Temba, thank you very much. Thank you for attending. Further discussion afterwards.